Well, this morning I'm gonna hand it off to Jason. Jason is a part of PACT Ministries, and he's going to talk to us about change today. So I'll hand it off.
All right. Thank you, Nick. And it's good to be with you and good to meet some of you, some new faces, but some familiar faces on the call as well. And so it's good to reconnect with some of you that I haven't seen in a little while. Yeah, as Nick said, I am the executive director of PACT Ministry. And as we think about change in ministry, really just to kind of preface the points and some of the content, wanted to say I'm not looking at how ministry is changing. This is more of the context of if I need to lead through change in ministry, what's a wise process to go about seeing change fulfilled to the finish line. And in my time in student ministry, and certainly in my time working with youth ministry leaders, I find that a lot of youth ministry leaders really desire change in their ministries, but lack the competence to be able to lead through successful change or fruitful change. And while it can be exciting to see change in our churches and in our student ministries, a lot of times it actually backfires and gets youth ministry leaders in trouble because they miss, I think, some of the steps that we're going to cover. And so, just to kind of set the stage for our content. But let me tell you, just for a minute, just a little bit about my ministry journey, so that hopefully it will give you some context for the opportunities that I've had to lead through change in student ministry. Because when Phil reached out to me about this topic, it's actually a topic I hadn't thought a whole lot about. But as I was reflecting on the content and my experience in the two churches and now a third ministry that I've been a part of, I've actually had to lead through a lot of significant change. And so I think I've learned a lot, probably from mistakes, but also some successes as well. And so when I started in ministry, I was the very first full-time paid youth ministry leader that the first church I served in had ever had. And so I was kind of charged with building student ministry from the ground up, but really took on my role as seeing how do I create a culture of healthy student ministry in the context of this church plant, because this church plant had never had student ministry done to the level that they were asking me to bring it up to. And so that in and of itself was trying to lead change. When I was hired at my second church after 10 years at that original church, I was actually hired in to bring about change in the student ministry. They had a high school director and a middle school director, and were two very siloed departments. And it was a very programmatic student ministry. So everything they did was built on events, retreats, program after program after program. They wanted to see some consistency in the student ministry from middle school to high school, and they really wanted to see a relational discipleship model built in the student ministry. And so that's what our team did. And then just to shorten all of this, I would say the last couple of years that I was at our church, I was leading adult discipleship and next gen ministry through a pastoral change. And it was the senior pastor who started the church. He was there for 40 years. And so I led through change during him retiring and the new senior pastor coming on staff. And so I was leading change in adult discipleship with a whole new discipleship model, leading next gen under a brand new pastoral leadership role. And so it was a significant amount of change that our church was experiencing. It also happened during 2020, which created a ton of opportunities for change in our worship services, discipleship, and all of the ways that we were thinking about church ministry during that season because of COVID. And so just to say, a lot of the things I'm talking about, I've had to go through a lot of hard situations, but I've also seen a lot of great, really cool things happen that the Lord has done. And then leading PACT Ministry, following the founder who had been here for 27 years. So we're just now kind of going through, okay, what does PACT Ministry look like in the next stage of our ministry life under new leadership with new regional directors and all of those kinds of things. So all that to say, bringing a little bit of experience of kind of leading through change. And I also want to say this before we get into kind of these points. When we talk about change today, we're really thinking about it from an organizational standpoint. We have to remember that we serve a God who is sovereign and who's on his throne. And we serve a God who is Trinitarian and who indwells each of his followers with his Holy Spirit. And he can rule and overrule any change process that we ever try to put in place. And so I think as ministry leaders, we really have to remember, yes, we can use all of the wisdom and strategy in the world, and it can be very helpful. And yet we have to be sensitive to the fact that we serve at the pleasure of a God who sits on a throne. And ultimately, he's going to see his will and way being done in our churches and in our student ministries. And so we have to hold this process with open hands and say, God, here's the process I think you're leading me through with wisdom. And at the end of the day, I really trust you with what is happening in this ministry. And so I just kind of wanted to preface it with that as well, to make sure that our heads and hearts are in the right posture of, submission to the Lord, who's kind of sovereign over all the change that we maybe desire to put in place. And sovereign over all these youth ministry leaders that want to change their churches to reach hundreds of students with a gospel, which is a great thing that they want to do. So anyway, all right. So now let's get to it. All right. So the way I want to kind of set this up, I've got 6 quick points. I'm kind of using a baseball theme. It is summer. I am an Atlanta Braves fan. And so I thought it might be a helpful way to just think about the process. And so we want to start with the Battery. The Battery is not just a great place of shops and restaurants outside of Truist Park, the home of the Atlanta Braves. The Battery refers to the team effort between pitcher and catcher. And in my opinion, it's one of the anchor points of a successful baseball team is the Battery, the pitcher and catcher. And if I think back to the glory days of the Atlanta Braves, 91 to 2001, we finished first in the NL East every year during that decade. And it was due in large part to the strength of our Battery. We had a starting rotation that has got to be top 2 or 3 all time in the history of baseball. And it's interesting when you look at the stats, that for 9 out of those 11 seasons, 3 of our starters went past 200 innings pitched each of those 9 seasons. And the only reason it didn't happen the other 2 seasons was because there was a strike that cut both of the seasons short. And since 2015, only 3 teams since 2015 have had 3 starting pitchers finish with over 200 innings pitched. And so you can see a lot of the success that the Braves had was due to the strength of the pitcher-catcher combination. So when we think about the Battery, these first 2 principles of creating change, this is sort of like the foundation for creating fruitful change in any organization, but in ministry for our context. And the first one is that we have to begin with the vision flow. Successful change happens with a foundation being there is a values, vision, and mission that we want to see played out in this ministry context. And without a clear vision flow, it's my opinion and also my experience that change is going to fizzle out because it doesn't have an anchor of a vision flow. When I refer to vision flow, I mean that progression of clear values, a clear vision, and a clear mission for an organization. That's the language I use. That language gets interspersed sometimes, that's okay. But a clear vision and purpose for why we exist and what we are trying to accomplish. If you think about the New Testament book of Acts, Jesus laid out a very clear vision for the church in Acts 1:8 when he said, "You will be my witnesses when the Holy Spirit comes upon you in Judea, Samaria, or Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." He laid out a very clear vision for the followers of Jesus, those 120 followers in the upper room, that they were going to carry out when the Holy Spirit came upon them in Acts chapter 2. And when we read through the book of Acts, that's exactly what happens. They begin in Jerusalem and they work their way out to Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Successful change in the New Testament church was anchored to a clear vision that Jesus cast and set out. And so as we're thinking about change in our own organizations or ministry context, or as we're helping other youth ministry leaders think about change, what's the vision behind the change? That is a very important question. A lot of times we find younger youth ministry leaders that all of us interact with and work with, they have these great ideas for change, but they have not thought about what's the foundational aspect of wanting to see this change played out. And that can be a real stumbling block to change. The second part of this battery, you've got driven by the vision flow, but it's got to be prompted by urgency. What is the urgency that is sensed in the church, in the leadership, the students, whatever it might be, that is prompting the change? And I think about the catcher's point of view here. The catcher sees the whole field. The catcher communicates well. The catcher knows every batter's strengths and weaknesses and calls pitches based on those strengths and weaknesses for his pitcher. The catcher is such an anchor to a successful baseball team. A sense of urgency must be the same. So we know there's a clear vision, but there's got to be a sense of urgency for why we need to change in the first place. I was reflecting on a gospel passage. I don't know if y'all remember Jairus and his daughter. Jairus' daughter passed away, died, and Jairus came to Jesus and asked Jesus to heal or to raise his daughter from the dead. And in one version I read, it said that Jairus threw himself at Jesus's feet and begged him earnestly that he would raise his daughter or heal his daughter at that point. The daughter dies a little bit later. Get that clear. But you understand, Jairus had an immediate sense of urgency that if Jesus didn't intervene in the life of my daughter will die. That was it. It was, Jesus, you intervene or my daughter is dying. There's urgency there. We need to have a sense of urgency when we're thinking about change. There needs to be a sense of urgency there. Is there something that's prompting us to need to change? So the last 2 years that I was at my previous church, I went into the adult discipleship role, and we were looking at changing our adult discipleship model. And here was what was happening. We had a part of our mission was we wanted to target younger families. We had been losing young families, like many churches, especially suburban churches, losing families. And we were looking at all the ways that we did discipleship. And what we found was that 80% of the adults that were involved in the discipleship offerings that we had were empty nesters and older. Not 85% of the people involved in adult discipleship at Northeast Pres did not have kids in the home. And we were thinking to ourselves, do we need to change the discipleship model at Northeast Pres? Well, that was an immediate sense of urgency. And when my team discovered that statistic, and I took that to the elders and I said, listen, these are the statistics based on our database that only 15% of the people participating in adult discipleship have kids in their home, yet we're trying to reach young families. Something is off. And I tell you what that did, that struck fear into the hearts of our elders and said, okay, something's wrong, something has to change. And we started that process of changing our model of adult discipleship. But it was prompted by first vision and mission, but then a sense of urgency. We did not have young families involved in the things we were offering because the things we were offering did not connect with young families, whether that was a timing, a setting issue, a context issue, a cultural issue. It wasn't working. And so there's got to be a sense of urgency. All right, let me go through the last four kind of quickly. I don't remember what time I'm supposed to stop, but I know I've got 20 minutes. Nick, if you flash a 5 at me or whatever, I want to respect our time and be able to discuss. So let's get to the other 4 now, which is the base paths here. And, first base is this. It's having a total team effort. I've found that when I'm coaching youth pastors, especially younger youth pastors, youth ministry leaders who are maybe in their first church or whatever. They're trying to lead change. The change is coming just from them. It's their vision, their urgency, their ideas, and they're trying to churn it out on behalf of the whole student ministry or the whole church or whatever. Um, you've got to have key people involved to make change sustainable and to get the buy-in that you want when you're trying to create change in an organization. You've got to get these key players involved. And there's a couple of ways to go about this, but I know, a couple of ways to go about this. Here's how I think about it. If you're in student, and we'll talk about student ministry because that's what we're doing here, and that's who we spend most of our time with, student ministry leaders, staff, volunteers, parents, I would say key stakeholders, key executive leadership. And I know that looks a lot different in a lot of different church contexts, but who are your leaders? Is it elders? Is it deacons? Is it an executive team? You need those people speaking into the change process and being aware of the change process and helping with the change process when you're trying to lead through change, especially if it is in an older, very traditional, been around for a long time church. You've got to get key stakeholders involved in the change process. Or y'all all know, because you guys have been in these settings before, change is not sustainable. Now, if you're in a brand new, you're a church plant, something like that, you can get away with a little bit more on your own. But a lot of our youth pastors are going into been around for a long time churches. Those are the hardest churches to create sustainable change in. So we got to get people involved in the change process. To give you a resource, Canoeing the Mountains, a really helpful tool for creating change. And there's a whole chapter in there about the different types of people that you need to have on board and have relationships with if you are going to create successful or sustainable change. Your allies, you've got to have confidence, opponents, senior authorities. You're going to have casualties there. And don't have time to go into all of these aspects, and dissenters, those that just are not going to agree with the change that you're trying to lead. But when you're trying to lead, you've got to get the key players on board with the change. If you've got a coalition that's leading change, you have a much better chance of sustainability. Over communicate clearly. If you think about us trying to lead change, how much time and effort goes into, let's say, staff meetings when trying to come up with change efforts in our churches? I mean, we beat change to death, don't we? I mean, I don't know. The churches I've been in, we talk about change. I mean, it's just like we circle around change over and over and over again, and meetings, staff meetings, strategic meetings. When we get ready to launch change, let's say I'm changing a program for this next school year for my student ministry, and I've worked through it the whole year. And then I have a 30-minute parent meeting to say, okay, parents, we are changing student ministry. This is what we are doing different. What happens? We've spent a year talking about changing something in student ministry, and our parents have heard for 15 minutes that we're changing student ministry. And those two things don't add up. We have to over communicate clearly to all of the key players involved in the change. Parents, volunteers, students, our bosses, our executive team, the stakeholders that are giving generously to the church. And, unfortunately, some of them want to see certain things happening in our churches. We need to over communicate clearly to all of these groups of people to give people time to process the what of change and the why of change. And unfortunately, we do a lot of communication behind the scenes, but the upfront public communication does not get done well. And the change, it confuses people, it frustrates people, it stresses people out. And it's really hard to move ahead with change without the support that we need to make it sustainable, because we've not communicated clearly and we've not over communicated clearly. 5 minutes, great. 2 more, we got this. Removing roadblocks. This is the next one, removing roadblocks. The chances are, if we are changing something about our ministry, we're changing our ministry philosophy altogether. There are things that our ministry is doing that are going to combat the change we're trying to see. They're roadblocks. And we have to be willing to let things go, to cut things in order to see change that is sustainable. Um, if you remember going back to the gospel real quick, what was Jesus's, a couple of places he declared his mission, but a couple of times he said that I am sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. You guys remember that story? I think that's when the lady, the Syrophoenician woman, came to him for healing, if I remember correctly. But he kind of stated a mission that when he was on the earth for those, 3 years of public ministry, he was primarily targeting the lost sheep of Israel. It didn't mean he did not care about Gentiles at that point. He actually had a plan for the Gentiles going forward, and it was through his apostles and through the early followers and the early church. But during those 3 years, he had a target, and it was proclaiming the kingdom of God to the lost sheep of Israel, and then to go to the cross. That was the mission. Therefore, he didn't go outside of Judea at all in his ministry context, because his mission was the lost sheep of the house of Israel. If he had gone out to the Gentiles at that point, it would have been a roadblock to his initial mission of the lost sheep of Israel. Leading through change, I remember when we started, we were trying to get our program and hangout times with students funneled through our small groups. We were trying to build small group as the relational component. But we had 100 programs going on in our student ministry over and over and over again. We had to cut programming so that we could enable our small group leaders to have the time and energy and bandwidth to create relational opportunities for their small groups, and not be throwing student ministry events at them left and right that competed with the times that they were trying to be with their small group students. Does that make sense? We had to remove roadblocks so that they could navigate the change successfully in the ministry. The final one is this: celebrate continually. When you begin to change a ministry, initiative, program, philosophy, direction, you have to celebrate over and over again. Small wins, big wins, staff meetings, you need to celebrate. And I'll finish with this, okay? Here's what I charged my staff team with all the time. They heard this from me all the time. I always told them, always have a story top of mind that you can share at any given point, whether that was with somebody in the church that came and asked you how ministry was going, whether that was in a staff meeting, whatever it was. Always have a story, not just a stat. When we came back from camp, I didn't want to just say, yeah, we had 180 students and it was great. No, we had a student pray to receive Jesus, or we had a student confess porn addiction in their small group. That is a story worth celebrating, to show relational discipleship is working in student ministry. But we had to celebrate that over and over and over, and get that story out to others so that they could hear and celebrate with us the change that we wanted to see happen. They were never allowed to come to a staff meeting without a story in their heads of something that God was up to in the life of a kid or student in the ministry. So these are some principles I've found helpful. Maybe you found them helpful in your own experience. Let me stop there, Nick, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, no, this was great. Thank you for walking us through, focusing on the real needs of change, involving the key players in change, and the idea of kind of leading towards a sustainable, healthy change process. And I want to continue that conversation in your context in small groups, taking it a little bit more personal. So I just dropped in the chat the questions for our small groups. I want to highlight something here. The questions are: when was the last time you failed at creating change? As you think about change in your own ministry context, how clear is the vision flow behind the change initiative? But here's the highlight I want to hit. How can you help other leaders handle and create change effectively? Think about this for a second in your groups. You have the opportunity as a network coordinator to help all of the people in your local network be a part of healthy change and sustainable change. How is that a place where you can serve in this process? That's a huge piece here. Or maybe it's on your team. How do you serve in the process with your own peers and your own staff? But I'm really looking forward to this discussion, so we'll jump into those groups now.
Feel free to pause the video here and think through these questions yourself, or with the group that you're viewing this with. Thanks for viewing this network conversation, brought to you by the National Network of Youth Ministries. We hope it helps you to set the table for unity and further conversations with other youth leaders. Any shared links are in the comment section on NNYM's YouTube channel. While you're there, feel free to like and subscribe. If you want to join our next conversation or training, you can find upcoming live events on our Eventbrite page. You can also connect to a local network leader at nnym.org. We're here because we are better together.